Toothpick performance flying. Can this little sucker get to 5.5 minutes at a race pace for the average pilot? This video's got 6 videos packed into one with tons of objective data. So we're going to throw a lot of facts and figures at you and you can make your own call. Let's go light it up.
Go Dronex.
So what we're trying to do is determine, can these toothpicks fly 5.5 minutes? So let's take a look at the 4 key facts that will help us get us there. Truth or false? Number 1, toothpicks are very weight sensitive. Let's throw some weight on them and see how our lap times come down. Bi-blades are much more efficient. Let's go ahead and do a couple of tests with tri-blades versus bi-blades, and let's actually measure the percentage of the efficiency. 48K, we hear how they can add 20% to your flight times in the 08 and 06 size motors, but can they function at the toothpick style motors? How much more efficiency can we get? Truth or lies? Battery weight has diminishing returns. How much battery weight can we add without affecting the flight performance? That's some of the stuff we're going to cover today. Let's get started. I mentioned this concept of mythical 5.5 minutes at race pace. Why do I bring that up? Well, one of the things we have at GoDroneX, and I recommend other people to do as well, is a concept of longer flight times. So let's explain what this is. Our races at Micro Mecha, which is a race format that focuses on lightweight quads, and it uses the enabling technologies. With 11.5 minutes, it's a magical number, because what you can do is we can have pit stops. Why can we have pit stops? Because they're safe, just like a whoop. So if you can fly 2.5 minutes, and that's all you can fly with an inefficient machine, that will require 3 pit stops. Each pit stop generally is 30 seconds. So you can see here, flight, stop. 2.5 minute flight, 30-second pit stop. 2.5 minutes, 30-second pit stops. That gives us 3 pit stops, 4 batteries. Now, if we can reduce the number of pit stops without necessarily changing flight performance, that will give us a competitive advantage and also move the hobby forward. Let's take a look at if we could fly 3.5 minutes with only 2 pit stops. We can do 3 batteries, 2 pit stops. We've saved 30 seconds of time. If we can get to 5.5 minutes with a 30-second pit stop, we can now get rid of, comparing to this one, 2 pit stops, which is almost a full minute of flying, and that's about 3 laps on a typical race course. So that's what we're here to discover. So here, what are the goals of Micro Mecha? Well, let's take a look at some of the typical problems at a race. Number 1 goal is we want it to reduce staging. So if you go to a typical race, in fact, I was just punching around and watching some of the traditional races this weekend and last weekend. One of the events, I just punched into one. There was 14 minutes to do a 2-minute race. That was their cycle time. So if you can take the amount of time you're flying and make it more than the time you're taking to get pilots to the line, you will dramatically improve your race experience. So typically at the old format, one of the things that people also will say is, hey, when I go to races, I had enough flying. I got plenty in. Well, what they're really talking about is they suffered what's called staging fatigue. What I found is around 13 times I've got to go to the line is when I kind of get burnt out, regardless of whether it's a 10-second flight or a 5-minute flight or even an 11-minute flight like a Micro Mecha. So what we've done is we've gone from 13 races down to 6 races, but we've dramatically increased the amount of time we're actually competing. So that's a goal of Micro Mecha. Next one, more stick time. We go to events eventually people get bored of standing around and only flying for 7 minutes. So let me explain what I mean by that. Here's a printout of an event that happened this weekend. And you can do this, go out to live time, just pick anything you want. Here's a bunch of pilots, and as you can see, if I've done the math for you, the average number of laps was 3.4, and the average time that this race did, their average lap time was 18 seconds. That's 62 minutes a race, and I've spot checked this with other races as well. That's about right. Every battery pack you fly at a traditional 2-minute format where you And a traditional 5-inch race is 1 minute of actual stick time. A lot of staging, a lot of activities. So if the average race you go to has around 9 packs, let's say 7 real packs and then 2 practice packs, you're getting around 9 minutes of racing. Even if you get 13 packs, you're getting 13 minutes of racing. What I've found is the equivalent is about 1 hour of time you're away from home equates to around 1 hour or 1 minute of racing. And that's not good enough for me. I got bored with that, standing around and constantly changing props and shuffling in and out. So Micromecha was to address that. So again, data's all out there. I've been studying this for 3 years now, and nothing has really changed, right? And in fact, it's actually gotten worse for some other things. More laps to count. One of the frustrations is maybe this is a millennial culture, I don't know, but you can go to an event and literally crash every single pack, and if you use 3 consecutive qualifying and you only get 1 A main or 1 main for the average pilot, right? That means you could crash every single time and get on the podium. That's the reality of it. So when nothing counts, you don't get those nervous jitters, and one of the reasons I go to events is to get those nervous jitters, that feeling that everything counts. There's no throwaways, and that's like real racing, right? You can't just crash and, oh, I want to do-over. So what Micromecha does is, from usually only counting 6 competition laps for a typical 5-inch event, which is 3 consecutive and then 1 main, where you usually fly 3 laps. That's only 6 competition laps. At our events, all laps count. And if you crash, you go and you flip your quad over, we get on average, the average pilot for anybody, not good or bad, everybody averages 130, and at our championships we were averaging 170, and we can do that in 4 hours, regardless of how many pilots are out there. More battles, and this is a new concept that we borrowed from golf. If you implement, what my favorite memories from my time flying in the early days of 2014 and 15 were the actual battles, right, where I had to compete against somebody. Well, those are so rare with the disparity in skill sets. So same thing with you go to a golf match, or you're going with your buddies for a foursome, you want to put a few bucks on the line. You do handicapping. That balances it out, and then all of a sudden it's a lot more fun, right? You have true battles. So we implemented another add-on, just like in golf. You layer on a concept of handicapping. And it's very effective when you have longer flight actual races. So since our races are 11.5 minutes, we have time to smooth all that out, and handicapping actually works really well, and there's a natural escalation. And for me, it's just a hell of a lot more fun. If I didn't have this format, I would have left in 2016. And now we're going into our 4th year of Micromecha. What else? The format. Micromecha format's really simple. The main thing why there was a change, and we didn't have this in 2016, is these guys right here. This toothpick style quad, or micro style quads in general, allow us to fly longer because of the power. The power to rate ratio on these is around 7:1 now, but it's dramatically lower in weight, which means we can do course marshaling. We can go onto the course and flip our quads over. And that's the reason you see low lap times. At this, with only 1 minute per race, is when you crash, you're done. You can see these people are only finishing 47 seconds of a 2-minute race, 28 seconds. Then they stand around and they do that entire cycle all over again. With us, you crash, you go out on the course, you flip your quad over just like RC car racing, and you can carry on. In 11.5 minutes, that's material. What we have found is even beginner pilots don't stop crashing because they have to go out there and flip their own quad over, and that's work. And if we wanted exercise, we'd be all jogging and running, right? So this is the first thing, is enabling technologies. I already talked about course marshaling. If you crash, you can go out there. Why? Because it's safe. Number 3, we fly longer because we complete our 11.5 minutes. We fly that entire 11.5 minutes. We complete for all the race time. So again, 11.5 minutes, that's great. And then we talked about this. We flipped the staging ratio. So rather than spending 5 minutes to get a race where some guys are only flying 45 seconds, we're staging 5 minutes, but now we're flying for 11.5 minutes completely, right? And that changes the game and makes it easier to organize. Somebody running this event's got to go into live time and get everybody staged 80 times during the day. We only have to do it 8 to 12 times a day. So it's just a hell of a lot easier for an organizer to run an event. Let's take a look at some of the details. I already talked about most of these, but our races are 11.5 minutes, and I talked about the magical reason why we have 11.5 minutes for solo races. We also do a 2-pilot team race style format as well with the same mechanisms, and that's 25 minutes. We do have pit stops, and the goal to move the hobby forward is to lower the number of pit stops, fly longer, fly more efficient. Self-marshaling, positional points. We want to get battles. Too many times I see these events and nobody's racing against each other. They're racing against the clock. And I've got that in my backyard. I can race against the clock, and I do. And I'll show you that with my Ray methodology. So I go to events to race against people, not against the clock. We can all do that at home. So it's positional points only. That means if you screw up, you don't get hammered on your times. It's positional. How do the other people do? It's all relative, right? The goal is to win. It's the same technique in bracket racing, right? In bracket racing, you're not supposed to be the fastest. You're just supposed to beat the other guys in your heat to move on. Same concept. We've removed qualifying. That's probably the #1 problem in drone racing today, is everybody goes to events and they're spending all their time doing a bunch of stuff, but they're not racing. And then to make matters worse, when they do get to a main, other than the A main, from what I've seen in live time, the average grassroots organization is only doing one race. And I remember going to one of those in 2017, and I said, I'm out of here. This is a joke. One race. Spent 5 hours driving. I got one race in. That wasn't fun. So there's no need for qualifying. Just go out and race. It's positional anyways. It's 11.5 minutes. You'll figure it out. Our spec is 178 grams, which is frankly on the edge of, if you did course marshaling and got hit by that, it could sting a little, no question about it. But then again, at 5-inch racing, that thing can fly at anybody. People line their tents up right against the edge of the course. That's about as dangerous as it gets. But with these toothpicks now, we're at, 100 grams is what we're typically at. So yeah, if you were to get hit, it would be, it's like a whoop, a little bit more than a whoop. So nobody's going home crying. But no blood, no foul. Handicapping and how to handicap. And it's, if you've ever seen golf handicapping, it's a very complex formula. Ours is super simple. We take 630 seconds. What's 630 seconds? It's 11.5 minutes minus 2 pit stops. Each pit stop's 30 seconds. We don't handicap the pit stops. So we're really talking about 10.5 minutes of flying, which is 630 seconds. Step 1. Figure out you do a couple of practice packs and figure out who the fastest guy is. Or you look at the previous race and you say, who was the fastest guy? What we do is we just go into live time and look at the person's third fastest time, right? Third fastest time is probably the average of the 5 fastest laps. And so, okay, that's the potential if they, fly at their peak. Let's use that. So we take 630 divided by the third fastest lap of the fastest guy. That gives us how many target laps the fastest guy will get. Then we just spot everybody else in the race more laps. So if the fastest guy was a 19.6 and I flew a 21.1, 630 divided by 21 is 29.85 projected laps. I subtract those two, I get spotted 2.3 laps. How do I do that? I go into live time, I make sure that caution flag feature is turned on, I start the race, and I immediately hit pause. You cannot spot laps before a race actually gets started. So we start it, we pause it, then you just force laps to the people that you need. And then what we do is, if you really want to get granular, since I would need to be spotted a third of a lap, that's 10 seconds, I would get a 10-second head start. On your mark, set, go. Greg goes for 10 seconds, and then 10 seconds later, the fastest guy goes. What you will have when you do this format is battles. We have proven, now this is going into our 17, 18, 19, and 20. This is our 4th year of Micromecha. Not our 1st year. Our 4th year, we have proven that we will have photo finish battles every single race. And that's fun. That's my definition of fun, is battling humans for positional points and flying a lot. and making sure everything counts and getting those nervous jitters. So that's what Micromecha Format does. That's how to handicap. Super easy to do if you have a calculator. I usually have one of these, just a simple calculator round, or use your phone. I got a whole fleet of these guys. I've got 4 of them, and I've tried a bunch of different things. So I'm going back to these 4 truths, right? So let's go study what I've learned throughout this process. This is my baseline machine. All up weight on this is 111 grams. Using 3-blade props, and I'm using a well, this is a race day quads, but it's a GNB 525 80C battery. It's pretty common for what most people will fly. And these are the Kebab 1303 motors with a 2mm shaft. So this is my powertrain, right? So that's what generates thrust. We've got a couple of different frames. This is the Beta FPV frame, very good frame. But I want to talk about some of these differences. So I also use the Diatone 329 or 339 frame. So if you can kind of see some of the details here, this is a good hardy frame. I think it's like 4mm thick. But the main difference is, see how close that blade comes to the canopy. With the 339, I've got a lot more space. So right now I'm not sure which frame I'm going to use, but I've got 4 of these things. Here's 3 of them. I don't know where the 4th one is at. He's floating around somewhere. Here he is. So you can see I've got, a bunch of these quads. I usually like to have 4 for the season, and then I tweak and tune as I go along. I'm using the Nameless 411 flight controller board. It's got 12 amps per ESC. Gives me 48 amps total, and according to my flight statistics, I have hit that a couple of times. Even in backyard racing, I've hit it a couple times. Now, this is the big debate. We'll study weight in a second, but on this one right here, you can see I'm using the canopy that came with the Diatone frame. Okay, this is a TPU frame, and you can see how I do my mounting of antennas. Some little design tricks here along the way. I use, these little guys, these zip ties, and I always fold the end over here. You can see that. I bend it over, and that way I don't need to heat shrink these. I can just slip the unshrunken heat shrink over it, and that keeps everything from getting into the blades. And this is one of the mounting techniques that I've used for my VTX. Antennas specifically. Otherwise, they like to get ripped out of there. So that's one setup. The other setup is this it's a Newbie drone canopy, which is super light, very strong. Everybody loves them. I have ripped them. I've hit them and they've torn and broke right there. So I'm still in an evaluation phase on what to do with that. Okay. Let's go. What else? So that was the canopy. RunCam Nano 3. Let me show you what that is. This is one of the lightest scenarios you can have. This is a RunCam Nano 3 put on the B-Brain canopy, right? And it's light. The problem is I've burnt out 3 of these already. 3 of them within a few flights. That tells me it's a regulator voltage problem. I've metered the Nameless RC and I'm getting 5.5 volts. This is telling me that 5.5 volts is within spec. I know you're probably thinking, well, Greg, just pull off the 3.3 pad. My point was, come on, I wouldn't, that's $60 worth of cameras and what? Six battery packs, I think it was. At that point, it's time to evaluate. So I also was doing this test at the same time. So I wanted to see how much weight really did make a difference. So I then tried the Nano. Right now I've got the Nano 3 on there. Now you can put a Nano 3 in this canopy, right? You can do it, but you have to remove the lens and then put it back on, and that actually secures it, so you don't need to do anything else. So that's what I've done on that, and I'm continuing to do tests. The problem is, of course, I lose camera protection, which is a big deal to me. Camera protection is a huge deal to me, and that's where you can see the camera protection that this TPU has. Haven't broke a camera yet, and again, one of the benefits of this Diatone frame is that I've got protection here. Right? So that's kind of important. For me it is, at least. So we'll see how that goes. Now the argument with this frame is, if it gets stuck in a tree, it's harder to get down. Ironically, I've gotten stuck in a tree with this, and I've not gotten stuck in a tree with this. But I'm not a freestyler, so getting stuck in a tree isn't a big deal to me. Oh, what else? The Eachine Nano VTX. So I did not buy the Diatone 339 Total Kit, which comes with a TBS transmitter. I've been using this Eachine one, which I like. I've been a big fan of Eachine VTXs for a long time. But you can see mounting the VTX has been a bit of a chore. So what I'm doing right now to simplify is I just take welder's glue and I glue these braided style antennas to it, and then I don't need to do the zip tie. It's over here. Problem with that is I have to mount that VTX sideways and the wires come out. And like I said, when I took a hit and this canopy ripped right there, this came in, this little yellow wire, which is the cam wire, right? Cam video signal, went right into my blades, boop, and chopped it. So we're going to, somehow my gut's telling me I'm going to end up with the TPU. And you'll see the weight savings between these two in the next section. What else? Straps. So one of the things that Kebab will talk about and said, he's like, don't use these straps, use a rubber band. And to that I say, nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. And I'll prove that again in the next slide. Diatone, without a doubt, makes some of the best straps. You don't need to modify them. They're sewn great, really thick, the Velcro female part on this, or male part of it, and a metal buckle. So this is how I mount my batteries. I like Velcro. I do not like, Umagrad grips. I like it to stick. And then the other thing that is just brilliant, and I can't believe it took us, so many years to figure this out, but mounting the battery sideways. I have not thrown a battery yet, and for me, as you'll see in a flight video, flying in my backyard where there's trees and undergrowth everywhere, if I throw a battery, there is a very good chance I never find that quad again, at least not in the season. So the fact that it's sideways, and if I hit this way, I don't lose a battery, and that's good. That's good. That means I can use my beeper, which, speaking of beeper, one of the things that I add is this little guy. So the problem with beepers, as most people know, is they don't mount really well. And a lot of people don't use them because they fly in soccer fields. Well, that's not, freestyle guys need them, but race guys don't. So for those that don't know, you can buy a square beeper that's easy to mount, but they're rather large. This one is from HDLRC, got it on Banggood, but there's a couple other brands that have it too. So you get LEDs and a beeper. Well, why would I do this versus this? Well, simple. This little beeper is significantly louder than this bigger beeper. And this thing has never broken on me. Beepers generally will fail for me because it resonates off the caps. And if those caps get bound, it kills your beeper. And then I also get the benefit of adding 2 LEDs. And the wiring all fits perfectly into the nameless wiring, or for matter any of these Toothpick style flight controllers. So that's how I do them, and I was able to mash them in. So you can see here, I've got it mashed right in there in this. I know the resolutions here. I've got a crappy webcam coming over the top of this with only 640, so that's the way it goes in the world of video editing. But you can see I've got a little metal stud that comes up and goes here and holds the whole package nice and secure. Another thing is, for those looking for hardware, we don't use plastic for this. That's insane. Pyro's got a nice little setup where you can buy 4 of these. I think they're 30 millimeters with a lock nut with a little shock mount in there for about $1. So every time I buy from him, I buy a bunch of them, and because nobody ever seems to have the full sets in stock, and you certainly don't want to order from McMaster Car because you'll end up a lifetime supply of things you just don't need, plus pay all that shipping. Okay. Screws. This is one of the things you're going to see here is this bumper. So these are Kebab motors. Good luck trying to get them. I got messaged when they came in stock, and I bought 16 of them, 18 of them. No, I bought 18 of these things. When 3 minutes later, they were sold out, and they're not in stock. Kebab is not a manufacturer or retailer really to count and trust. Everybody knows that. Unfortunately, they're good motors, and there's no motors that are in stock anywhere from any manufacturer that are even made that fit a 1303 size and a 2mm shaft. I can't find it. So unfortunately, you're kind of stuck in this, or you have to go to a 1204. Well, that's not a problem. 1204s are fine. But the problem with that is nobody still makes this 2mm shaft. And a lot of people think that's not a big deal, and maybe it's not. But all I know is last year, and I'm going to pop up my fleet from last year, I was flying the massive droner fleet, and I sold them all. My all-up weight on those was 175 grams with the 853S battery. On those, I used the Hulky 2540s, which is what just everybody uses, right? I tried flying without screws on those. Poof! Those things popped the moment you ran into anything, right? Because there's 4 degrees of lift, right? So I was skeptical about pressure fitting, and oh no, you don't need to do it. Well, that's right, you do not need screws. Now, why that is important is because a screw weighs a half a gram. So if you can remove 8 screws, you've removed about 4 grams of weight alone for just the screws to hold the props down. And we'll do a test later to show you how much 4 grams affects flight times and performance for that matter. And we can extrapolate that concept down to the screws down that hold your motor there. You can get by on 2 screws. But here was what I learned. In my durability testing, right? So whenever you get a new set of quads, you always do what's called a shakedown test, right? For me, that takes about 2 weeks of flying a bunch of stuff, trying things, repairing, really making it what I call durable. I mean, once it's set and forget. Once I get it right, I'm going to build 4 of them the same way, and I'm just going to go out and frickin' fly, right? I crashed into a tree, a pretty hard hit. You'll see, it's trees, and this base got all bent up using on this frame. With this one only has 3 screws down here. The the Beta FPV has 4 screws. So the decision I had to make was, number one, can I do something to protect that motor, because they're never in stock. Once I'm out of motors, I'm going to have to be switching brands, because that's what you got to do. It's not in stock. And then, is 3 screws really enough, right, for that type of thing? And so what I ended up really doing for durability protection, one of the things the Kebab's frame does have, and maybe a few others do, is he extends this part of it out a little bit. So I just went into my laser and lasered up some GRF4 material, and it made my own little bumpers. And that added 4 grams, right? So there was a trade-off. I added a lot of weight here with all of these screws for the motors. I'll probably end up removing a couple of screws here on the back ones, but I need 4 to hold this whole system, or at least 3 of them for this system, right? So now when I take a hit, bzzz, you can see, bam, I've got some protection. And my camera angle is set at around 45 to 40 degrees is what works for me out in the backyard. Okay, so that's my setup, my powertrain, and my mechanics. Now, let's talk about the weight breakdown. And this is our test. One of the tests we're doing is weight, right? How much weight can we add? That's one of our truths, right? Our truth or lies. Toothpicks are very sensitive to weight. Let's do a test. Okay, so a couple of things we want to show you guys. Oh, it's not picking it up. Oh, too bad. Can I angle it a little bit? Unfortunately, you won't be able to see that. You'll have to just trust me on this. Okay, performance. We break our weight down into 2 categories, performance and durability. 2 batteries that was one of our tests. These 2 batteries. This is a 525 and this is a 625, or 650. The spread on these 2 batteries is 3.5 grams. I'll show you another slide on that in a moment. But you can see the size. Okay. Props. Going from a 2-bladed prop to a 3-bladed prop adds 1.5 grams. Right now I'm preferring 3 blades. And I'll explain more on that as well. Durability. We've already talked about this camera canopy scenario, right? Well, that's 3.5 grams. And just so you know, the dry weight on this is around 60 grams. Let's just use that. So that's just 5% of your total weight if I'm using this setup, Nano 2 with TPU canopy versus this setup. Nano 3 with a lighter canopy. Right? So that's a big consideration. This bumper added 2 grams, not counting screws. Motor screws, 1.5 grams was the total of 8 motor screws. And then prop screws, the same thing. We can remove some of the screws there. So all up, the discretionary weight that you could trim off, these are performance related, so you don't have, that's a separate subject matter, is 8.5 grams. So we're going to do a test of adding 8.5 grams. By the way, glue 3 pennies together, you end up with 8.5 grams. That's it. This is what 8.5 grams feels like. 3 of those. And I taped these to the motor, to the batteries, and I flew around, and we'll show you some of the stats on that. A thing about motors, just for those that don't know, and probably most people know this, last year I flew 1105. So the first number is the height, then the second number, the first number is the width, and then the second number is the height. So there's really 3 motors out for toothpicks, and performance toothpicks at least. 1105s. If you add these 2 numbers together, you end up with 16. A 1204. Add those 2 numbers, you get a 16. And a 1303. So these are more pancake style motors. So you add 13 plus 3 is 16. So all of them produce effectively the same amount of thrust. But the discussion is the taller the stator, the more thrust there is in the high end of the range. The lower or the less height in the stator, the more you have on the bottom end of the range. Personally, couldn't tell the difference, but probably the reason I couldn't tell the difference is last year I flew an 1105, right, predominantly on all my machines, and I was more in the high end of the throttle range because of the sheer weight, 175 grams. Now I'm at 100 grams. I'm lower in the throttle range, so of course it feels the same. I'm flying 2 different motors. Okay, there's your brief tidbit on motors. Lots of information, some software. I am using Betaflight 4.2. I did turn on battery sag compensation. What that means is my throttle stick is consistent throughout the entire flight. I did have to bump up my throttle curve, and I did it on my radio to compensate for that adjustment. If you go out and look at, there's 4 settings out there in the wiki page from Betaflight. I chose the race performance settings and cut and pasted them in, and frankly I didn't see any difference. I'm sure there is. I didn't feel any. I used the stock PIDs, but I've changed the PID setting just a tad. I've raised up the DMIN just a tad. I am running as base JESC 48K, and I do have D-Shot 300 with bidirectional, and yes, it works. Bidirectional gets rid of lots of prop wash. It does, and it's effortless, no tuning. And again, I said this is Betaflight 4.2. These were last year's batteries. This is an 850. This is a China Hobby Light 853S. This is how I do all my coding. I'm a big color guy, right? So I color code everything. So there's a 653S, and this is an 853S, right? So this took me up to the maximum weight, and I could get 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Remember this chart, this was what I was targeting. 2 pit stops, 3.5 minutes. And 90% of the pilots, this is what they flew. Everybody could get 3.5 minutes of flight. Top pilots even could push this. They might, but if they had inefficient setups, they were pushing 2.5. The point is, you could easily fly. Most people could fly 3.5 with the right setup. But for me, in order to get 3.5, I really had to, max out. I was right at the top end of the weight scale, and I used an 850 to get me there. This is a 3S China Hobby Light. We all know that there's more punch packed into this than the sticker says. This is also a 650 3S. Look at the size difference on these. This thing is huge. So one of the things that I always said, oh, there's about 5% more amp hours in this than they advertise. A 525 weighs 40 grams. I've subtracted the weight of all of this cabling, right? So we're really getting down to the stuff that has density, energy density. That gives us 13 milliamps per gram. If you put this on the scale, and we subtract out the same weight for our cables, you will end up with 83 grams. If I take 83 grams and multiply it by 13, I end up with a whopping 1,080 milliamps compared to the advertisement of 650. So either this formulation is off the charts wonderful compared to this, or this is understated and this is dramatically overstated. Most people agree this is dramatically overstated. I'm sorry, this was an 850. Sorry, wrong. But you know, the point here, I was flying with, using the same math, a 1,080 milliamp battery compared to what I'm flying with today. So you can't just do apples to apples, right? You really do need to fly it and figure it out yourself. So again, one of the other tests for battery weight, now we're going to compare the GNB's 525. This is an 80C. This is a 650 60C. So would I feel that in flight? But it's important to note that that weight difference is 24%. So for 3.5 grams more, I get 25% more battery. So I'm saying, can I get to that mythical 5.5, 5.5 minutes of flight by just adding 3.5 grams? Or in fact, how much more do I need? Do I need an 850? Well, they don't make an 850 or 750 or 700 in this profile. These are your two profiles, effectively. They make a 300 and they make a 350, but they cap it at 650. And they don't make an 80C in this either, by the way. And that black label there represents the 60C, and then you'll see the pinkish labels for GMB. Those are your 80Cs. So there's a little more math here, but interesting math nonetheless. So we've covered batteries. We're going to keep everything constant. And what we're trying to do is figure out how much energy was used. So I set up a course in my backyard. And I turn my transmitter into a timer. And I make sure that every lap I'm hitting the target lap time that I'm trying for. Right? That means I'm covering the same distance with the same effort to get there. And then when I change various parameters like props and batteries and weight, and I can find my energy used. Once I have my energy used, I now can figure out a percentage of truth or lies for these categories. My test format was I ran 16 laps and my target lap time was 12.25 or 196 seconds. That was my goal, is to fly, which is about 3 minutes and 15 seconds, and then there's a little bit of in-out time, right? And so it's about 3.5 minute flights. And I measure bounce back. So yeah, like I said, this is really 196, and it's 3 minutes and 15. So, and I always want to make sure I bounce back to 3.7. Also, I do overcharge my batteries to 4.25. So on Betaflight, I did put in that, a custom logo. Couple of things on that custom logo is if you export and you put anti-aliasing on for your logo design, you will get shades of gray and it will not import, and it will tell you that little green thing won't light up. So I got burned on that one. Make sure you do not anti-alias, and you can only have 3 colors: white, green, and that's got to be the RGB, and those are all zeros except for the G, which is 255. And that'll get you going on that. So here it is. One of the things for those that are used to flying in soccer fields, you have wide open green lush grass with nothing to distract you. When you do nature flying or tree flying, which, for those that don't know, Go Drone X originally was called FPV Tree Racers because, it's a hassle to set up courses. So once we discovered trees and then these yellow foams, pool noodles, most people make gates out of pool noodles. I just use them to mark the tree. It also adds a little protection if I miss. You can see it's almost like looking at a spotted Dalmatian. The hardest part of flying is spotting where you need to go. And without ground markers, it can get a little challenging. And I know this because since I do so much, last year I timed over 3,000 laps with different courses. And I know for sure that I can fly 15% faster on an overcast day. because it's so much easier to spot where I'm going. So in fact, you'll see when I show you my ray methodology of practicing, I actually track whether it's sunny or cloudy. So you can see you're going through some trees. This is basically a figure 8 course. It's relatively simple, and the point is I should be able to fly, at a race pace on this and not worry too much about crashing. And what I do is I land, I look at the screen, and I measure my total time, and I look at the milliamps used. So I always made sure to use the same exact test rig, and I changed everything I needed to on this. So the first test was a baseline, where I did 3 blades, 111 grams all-up weight, and the 525 battery. This was also using 48K. I was using 855 milliamps. I still can't see that. And I was flying at 197 seconds. I divide my milliamps by seconds, and this gives me my baseline. So in this scenario, it was 4.4 milliamps per second, right? So this is why I have to fly the same distance. I have to fly the same time, right? And that's why I've got to listen to my lap times to get that. Baseline is 4.4. Okay. That being said, and then I always measure my bounce back and my max amps and a whole bunch of other things as well. The next one was weight. Remember I said the discretionary weight was 8.5 grams. Now, in other words, if I stripped off all the bolts, I went with the light canopy setup, I took off my bumpers, right? Those are the discretionary non-performance. That equates to 3 pennies. So I taped on 3 pennies, then I flew. And what I ended up with was 4.74. And that's about 10%. Well, 10% on a flight time, let's just do the math. If you were flying 4 minutes, how long is 10% on a 4-minute flight? You would add 25 seconds. That's not bad. But what I really found when I added that weight was I crashed a couple of times. And what you can't see here is I really struggled to hit my target times. I mean, it's hard to imagine 3 pennies affects weight that much, but my big takeaway was that it didn't. I had a hard time flying. Weight was a big deal when it came to 100-gram quad, all-up weight quads. So I'm calling that, in the world of truth or lie, I'm calling that a truth. So I'm saying toothpicks are very sensitive to weight. That is a truth. 8 grams equal to about 8% of performance, and that's around 25 seconds on a 4-minute flight. And if our goal is to get to 5.5 minutes, 8% is material. 2-bladed props. We hear how efficient these 2-bladed props are. Bi-blades are much more efficient. My data showed that they were 4.5% more efficient. When I was going through that one section in the course that's a candy cane, it was struggling. You could hear it was winding out. I'm like, God, give me a break. This is just a simple candy cane. I'm calling that false. I don't believe that the efficiency savings of 4.5% of bi-blades is worth the loss in performance. I'll take tri-blades all day long. Weight sensitive? Yes, true. Bi-blades? Yes, they're more efficient. Not enough for me to change. I'm going with tri-blades. Number 3, 48K. So you guys have seen the video where guys get 30% more flight time on a MOB 6 if we upgrade to JESC and bidirectional, or not necessarily bidirectional, but 48K PWM. And I put it to 24K. The bigger the motor, the less efficiency gain there is. All those tests that we saw were based on 06 and 08 motors. Whoop style machines. When we get into the 1300, 1200, or 1100 class, there was a gain. There was a 3.5% gain, but certainly not 20%. Certainly not 30%. I was expecting this to be around 10%. But again, why would you not use 48K? It makes your quad fly better, and you're going to get 4%. So yeah, this stays. So this one, I'm keeping. Weight, yeah, sorta. I'm keeping my weight down. My blades, no. Sorry, bi-blades, you're gone. And then here's the last test, and this leads to us to getting close to the conclusion of the video. I'm adding 3.5 grams to go from a 525 to a 650. Also, I have voltage sag compensation on, so I'm not feeling it in the throttle, right? Betaflight is giving me a consistent throttle until I start dipping below 3.5-ish. There was my first flash at 330. So when I start to gun, and we start getting high amp draw, you'll get that little message. When those start showing up at a higher frequency, I know, the things are starting to run low. Generally, when I'm flying, I am not looking down at any data. I'm trying to, guys, I'm almost 60 years old. I have to have 110% focus on the course. Nobody can talk to me. There can't be any lawnmowers in the background. I need everything I can to pull this stuff off. So right now you can see our batteries are at 3.51 and we're at about 4 minutes and 11. And you can see this is a pretty good clip, right? Now I've got a little bit of weight on this, so it's a little harder to fly, 3 grams, but not that bad. Relatively simple course here. But it isn't just wide open. I've still got to hit holes and gaps coming through here. This is the one that I use the most amount of energy if I fly it nice and tight, which I didn't do there that time. Come around, another sharp turn, punch through here, kind of coasting. And then this is, I give it a little gas. Here you can see the low battery. I bounced into something, come back around, trying to get readjusted. Continue on. Now look at, I'm at 5 minutes and 50 seconds. That battery's flashing to 3.5. We're now at 5 minutes. 5 minutes at pace. Again, 90% of all GoDroneX pilots who attend Micromech, and that's about 70 pilots. 90% of these people, this is they're going to be plus or minus a half a second off this style of flying, or slower. And if they're slower, they can fly even longer. Right? They could probably fly 7 minutes. So we're at 5:17 and now I'm bringing it in. It's worth it to buy a 650 and you can get 5.5 minutes. And if you can get 5.5 minutes, you can fly a 1 pit stopper. And that was the goal this year. The beauty of my backyard is I live against a forest preserve. I can, hang permanent structures there. And I design all these different courses. Because in Micromech, consistency is everything. There are no throwaway laps. You will fly 130 laps, and every one of those laps will count. One crash is equivalent to giving up 1 lap. So if you want to win, you got to fly clean first, and then apply speed second. Right? So I have a method where I fly 5 batteries. Right? And I set a target lap time. And I fly 10 laps. The next battery I lower it by half a second. The next battery I lower it by another half a second. The next battery I lower it by another half a second. And the next battery, the 5th battery, I lower it by another half a second. The spread between here and here is 2 seconds, or about 10%. That's exactly what happens at a race. If you look at the average person's lap times from their first session to their last session, it's about 10%. And we've tracked that for years ago, GoDroneX. I then measure how many laps I get within plus or minus a half a second. And what this technique does is you can easily tell you, after you do this enough, you will learn exactly what 0.3 of a second looks like when you make a mistake. You fly so many laps and you're trying to always maintain a constant time, that if I do a close split S, like there's a split S right here, right? I come over and I come through that. If I float out here 8 feet, that's a half a second, opposed if I hug it really tight. And this benefit has taught me how to spot things, like a clean line. You hear the concept of slow is fast? Oh, it's so true. If I fly a clean lap, every time I'm hearing my lap time, I'm like, oh, that felt slow. It was just because I wasn't, overshooting turns and just letting the natural race line happen. Then, so the first couple packs, I try to get rid of all the bad habits, right? Which is slow is fast, fly a clean line, look ahead, right? There's only three main racing techniques. Look ahead, fly a clean line, and then for me, minimize the amount of throttle stabbing. That creates a lot of instability. So if you can hold your throttle more consistent and drive with your right hand, it's just a lot easier to be more consistent and reduce those crashes. And then what I do is, so let's say for the first one, I hit a good session for me is 7 laps. So I put 7 down here. Then I look at my timer, right? And I say, okay, what was my total time? So while I'm doing these 10 laps, if I'm coming under 21s, then the next one would be slightly over. So I'm playing with tenths every single lap, and I'm doing all these calculations in my mind every time I fly. So let's say I flew a 212. So right, the next one I do, let's say now I only hit 3 of those out of 10. And then maybe since I missed so much, I also was over a 207, right? Next one I maybe hit 6. Next one I maybe hit 5. Next one I hit another 5. And let's just say for to move this along, I actually hit my targeted times. And again, all this is here. We're going to cover that in just a second. How do you turn your transmitter into a timer and do this technique? My formula is add all these up. So this is my positive. 10, 26. Then I subtract how much I missed overall. So if my goal was 210 and I flew 212, minus 2. Minus 2. 0, 0, 0. So I would subtract minus 4. So I would take 26 minus 4, and then I also subtract the number of crashes. And I chart this year. Here's my new one. I don't know if you guys can make it, but I changed it. Last year I subtracted 3 points for every crash. This year I upped it to 8 because I should be a little better. So if I had any crashes, let's say I had 2 crashes times minus 8 is minus 16. So 26 minus 4 minus 16 is equal to 6. I plot 6 on my graph. And that's how I race against myself. R-A-Y, race against myself. And if I'm just going to race against the clock, why do I need to go to an event where I only get 1 minute for every hour I'm there? That's a waste of my time. I have more fun racing against the clock in my backyard. And then I have a new rule this year. I only can fly that course 3 times because you can see these green lines represent how many times I flew the course set. So you can see, look at how my numbers last year went up. Boop, 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 boop. Well, what happens is if you fly, that's a lot of laps. Each one of these dots is 50 laps. So right there's 300 laps. Most people won't fly 300 laps an entire race season. They're only getting 20 laps on average at every event they go to. They would have to go to these 5 dots represent 3 years of a typical recreational drone racer's life. And I can do that in a weekend, right? Or in 1 day. So you can see how it becomes very boring to go to race events, unless you're going for other reasons, but even that gets boring after a while, right? You're there to race. People who go to race events in year 2 and year 3 of their flying is because they're going there to compete. So if they're not competing, they won't continue to go, right? The bromance wears off after event number 3. Especially if they have to set up stuff and tear stuff down, drive long distances. So one of the changes I made this year is you can only do 1 course for 3 scoring sessions, because otherwise it goes on autopilot. You stop thinking about it, and that kind of takes away the fun. So my average last year, for those that want to know, is I averaged 9 points for if you average all this out, right? So I did, God knows, thousands of laps. And this year, finally set my, after I did all my testing that you just saw, I started now flying course number 2, and you can see I started with a minus 20, right? And then I shot up to a minus 11. So how do you get minuses? Well, it's easy. You miss a lot on, all it takes is one, if I bounce off a gate and bobble, and then go back and get in line, that's 5 seconds. So this number automatically adds 0.5 or minus 5. So that wipes out a lot of the good stuff. So a perfect score would be 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 50, and then no crashes, and you flew it absolutely perfectly within tenths of each second, right? And that's what I was doing when I was doing this benchmark testing, is I had to hit within tenths, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laps. That's about as subjective as you can possibly get for any type of data. So this is my Roy methodology. I believe people can do this. If I couldn't do this in my backyard, I would have been gone years ago. This is my fun, right? And I have a racing background. I'm kind of a competitive person by nature. I love ski racing. I love car racing. Anything against where there's racing, right? The speed junkie. And by the way, it gets a little harder when you get a little older. Your reaction times drop. I relocated the bind button once over here. I got small hands, so then I finally relocated it over here. So this is how I fly, right? And I make sure to hit my stopwatch at a place where I'm not doing a lot of this stuff, usually in a straightaway. Or you scroll down to lap timer. Bit out of focus for you guys, but it's right there, lap timer. You click it, and then it's hard to see here, but you can set, do you want a stopwatch, do you want a countdown, and the number of laps. This is set to 10. How do I get to that screen when I actually want to use it? Use this scroll bar. 1, 2, there it is. There's my lap timer. On your mark, set go.
Started.
And this will tell me my lap times, right? So it's racing
4.44, 2.53, 2.27.
and this is just loud enough for me to hear. That's how you do it. And then when I'm done, I click the review button and it brings them up, and then I just scroll through and I count how many laps were plus or minus. That takes a few, maybe 15 seconds after every time I'm done, and I put it on my little post-it pads and I transfer them in, and I have the time of my life. It also makes me fly consistently. I got a lot better from it, and I'm not constantly waddling out there to go get my quad in my backyard. So my ask from you guys, if you've enjoyed GoDroneX, spread this video around, specifically to organizers, to show there is another way. You don't have to fold the cards up. You can do other things if your head counts are dropping. This is great for bringing people into the hobby as well. You don't need AMA. You can fly races in your backyard, and I can tell you that if I had to drag all that crap out and do all the crap that I used to do, I still wouldn't do it. It's a pain, but if you can do it in your backyard, right, and guys can come over, you have to throw a little food on the grill, right? Use handicapping, put a little money on the side. It's a lot more fun than getting 1 minute for every hour you go to an event. Is where we're getting, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you want to do, right? So that's it. Light it up. Check out, if you're involved with kids and school kids and you want to get involved in drone racing and we'll get them into the STEM programming world, check out our website. We're going to be introducing 2020 product line shortly with lots of curriculum videos. And if you want to learn how to program, if a third grader can do it, as an adult you can too. It's a lot of fun. I have a boatload of time. So my last call out, let's go light it up.
GoDroneX. X1, only at GoDroneX.
Day 2 at the X1 Cup Round 1. Today was Rotocross, where the courses are much more twistier. We had an incredibly difficult course today with the Matrix. We had duck unders, we had staggered slaloms. A fantastic course. We were seeing run times in the low 50s. Even some guys broke 47s. Let's take a quick tour of the course. High speed, long straightaway in a rotocross course is rare, but we've got it right here. From there you go into a hockey stop slingshot style turn into our first obstacle, the duck under. Exiting the duck under, we come into the Matrix. Different set from the Grand Prix style. This time we have what's called the corkscrew, inspired by Laguna Seca's famous corkscrew, where Alex Zanardi made that famous pass as he came through the corkscrew down the hill. We have the same thing. You come shooting underneath, you form a figure eight as you climb up and over, and then back down the other side, underneath the Matrix, and you skyrocket out into the next obstacle. We're now on the fourth obstacle of our course, a duck under, which leads up to our rhythm section. The GoDroneX rules state that in order to have a rotocross course set, you must have a slalom. Today we set a tricky one, the staggered slaloms. 5 turns. It's a rhythm section. If you get it wrong, you start falling behind and you start doing what we call in auto racing, the tank slapper. The final obstacle of our Rotocross X1 course is the 150-degree duck under. A lot of times you'll see duck unders in a straight line. We put them in turns. A lot trickier that way. Last 2 turns, high-speed sweeper, 2 more gates staggered so we can set you up for a straight entry into the final pass. This, folks, is the X1 Rotocross course set.
X1, only at GoDroneX.
Check this out.
you enjoy these.
Go Drone X!
See race results at GoDroneX.com and join the conversation on Facebook at GoDroneX and FPV3 Racers. If you would like GoDroneX to perform at your next event or festival, contact us at GoDroneX.com. Now, go light it up.